Hey folks, so I know it may seem like we're going a bit slow here at the start, but that's because I absolutely want to make sure that everyone can follow along. And it's imperative that during this course, you have the easiest time possible hitting the ground running and building your mobile app. And part of that is this phone connection over here. That's 80% of the challenge. The code is easy, but being able to visualize what you're doing is so powerful. And just with all of that, I wanted to give a quick summary of some of the core things that we're seeing over here. Some of the core things that you're going to have to pay attention to. So, as we said, you can toggle your preview on and off. You can see how many devices are connected. Mo's iPhone is connected, and you can reload the app. You can see the version of Expo we're running. You can put your editor in a dark theme or a light theme, whatever you prefer. I'm going to switch it to dark theme. If you want Vim mode, if you're aware of what that is, turn it on. If you're not aware of what it is, I would steer clear of it because it can be daunting. It's a whole different skill that you would need to learn. And then you see here, over here, the prettier. So let's say you're typing a bunch of code and you're doing and all of this stuff. If you hit prettier, well, it's not going to do anything because all of this code is invalid. But let's say you did something like color white. You see how this is off balance? Well, if you hit prettier, boom, everything makes sense. It makes things pretty. No pun intended. It's just the name of the tool. So with that, we've gone through a couple of interface rundowns by now, and I just wanted to show you a bit more. But now comes the interesting part. So we're looking over here, our app.js, our entry file, where we are coming in and where the core of the application is. Think of it as the tip of the sword. It's where everything comes together. It's where our app comes to life. So over here, you can see we're importing React from React. This is because we want to be able to write JSX. What is JSX, you ask? Well, it's JavaScript markup. It basically allows us to write things like this and have them be able to be processed and understood. And React is one of the core libraries that React Native uses to achieve the simplicity of being able to write React-like syntax without needing to learn Android, iOS. It's the language and the library of choice for making the UI work. But of course, React is just one piece of the puzzle. Because we're not writing React. No. We're writing React Native. And so over here, you can see we're importing text, view, style sheet. And this import, what this is basically giving us is it's pulling the right components that we need in order to build up our UI. So we're able to input text, like we can see here, hello world. We're able to put blocks on the screen, like if you're aware with web development, divs. You're able to position them on the screen and give them a nice pretty look and position. And a style sheet. And a style sheet is a concept that you may not be familiar with unless you've written CSS and JS. A style sheet is basically for us the ability to write our styles, give our views a specific position, markup, text color, background color, give our text a specific text color, bold, italic, specific font family, give it a nice pizzazz, And then we see here Expo constants, and the Expo constants are basically constants that can be used for specific values. We're not currently using it in this file. But over here you see one of the core things that you will see, export default function app. Now, this is a whole mouthful of words. Export default is basically telling us this file exports this one main thing. Now it can export multiple things, but this is the one main thing it exports. And it exports function app. This is the thing that pulls everything together. That tip of the sword, if you will. It's the thing that is going to build up the UI in such a way that we're going to be building FocusTime. Now, over here where the parentheses open, you can see the function body. And in the function body, we're returning a simple React JSX UI that it consists of a view and a text, hello world, like we saw. And so this view, as you can see, it has a style. So it has a specific look and feel to it. Now, what does that look and feel look like? Well, it's referencing styles.container, object dot, and then something in that object. So object.container. So in that object, we have another object called container, and we can see over here, it's giving it flex 1 and padding 50. Now, something you need to understand is, if you've written CSS before, if you're familiar with Flexbox and all these things, this will be very familiar syntax to you. But if you're new to all of this, basically what Flexbox is it's a paradigm that we'll be going deeper into as we go along the course. It's a way to make the UI fit, but fit in a way that makes sense. And so Flexbox, as it says, it flexes itself out. And so with the container, as we see flex 1, container is the top level. So what flex 1 says is, hey, I'm going to fill everything of the parent. Now, everything of the parent is the app. So it's the whole shell. So flex 1 is basically saying, hey, I'm going to fill the whole screen. That's basically what it's saying. And then padding 50 is saying, okay, well, I'm going to put a padding on the outside from here, from the right, from the bottom of 50 pixels. If we said, hey, do it of 500, well, we're going to see hello world shift off screen. If we did it of 100, we're going to see hello world pop up over here. If we did it of 10, we're going to see it pop up over here. And so basically padding is a way for us to say, hey, where am I? And you could specify padding top specifically. You could specify padding left. You can specify padding right, padding bottom. If you just do padding, it's going to apply to all 4. Padding top, bottom, left, right. And why do we use stylesheet.create? Well, it has inherent optimizations of applying certain memory efficient styling, right? It's not going to always have to recalculate everything. It kind of is a bit smarter, because you could also do something like this and override it in line, but now on every render of the app, it's going to have to recalculate this. So there are many benefits that come from using the style sheet create. And there are many other libraries that you can use on top of it and do more complex UI layouts and all of this jazz. And we're going to get into all of that. Don't worry. But this is the most basic that you can get. And so it's important to know what exactly is going on here. All right. So we're ready to start coding. And the first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of expo constants, because we're not really going to use that. We don't need it here. And I'm also going to get rid of text, because for right now, we don't really need that. What we're going to do in this video is going to be amazing. We're going to build a very, very simple navigation solution. And I'm kind of air quoting navigation solution because we're not really going to be navigating. We're going to be swapping out components one for the other. But what is navigation if not the ability to move from one state to another and view something else? So it's a very, very simple, lightweight solution that we're going to build. And first thing we need to do is we need to import useState, which is a hook that can be used by React to store state locally in a component. And what we're going to be storing is absolutely amazing. We're going to store something called a focus subject. And we're going to have a setter called setFocusSubject. And we're going to say use state, and we're going to set it default to null. We're going to say, hey, by default, we don't have a focus subject. And so this syntax over here is kind of a array destructuring method to get two properties off of useState. One is the focus subject that we currently have. The other is the ability to set the focus subject. So if we went ahead here and we said, hey, well, let's get back our text real quick, right? Let's get back text and let's just see what's going on here. And we said text and we said, hey, log me my focus subject real quick. And we closed off text. We need that. We can see that there's nothing in there. But if we said, hey, hello world is our focus subject, well, then we see hello world. So you can immediately see the benefit of this. We're storing something. And so with that being stored, at least, what we want to do now is equally as impressive. What we want to do is we want to say, hey, if you have a focus subject, well then render one thing, otherwise render another thing. So you can see here I said render null or render null. What that equates to is, let's say we had text and we said, if I have a focus subject, I have a subject. And if we didn't have a subject, I want to say, hey, text, I don't have a subject. And let's end the text here. And let's make it easy on ourselves. And all right, right now we see I don't have a subject. And if I said here, hello world, what you're going to see is, well, I have a subject. Amazing. Okay. So with this, let's go ahead and prettier that. We basically have a very, very, very simple navigation solution, right? If we have a subject, if I have a subject, here is where I'm going to build a timer. And if I don't have a subject, is what we're going to say is, here I want to build an input for a subject. Okay. So now we know what we want to do in specific scenarios. If we have a subject, we want to build a timer, but we currently don't have a way to include a subject, so we want to build an input for a subject. This is a very, 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 very lightweight navigation solution. I can't even call it navigation, to be honest. It's more of a switch between multiple states. If you did something more complex, you could switch between multiple different screens, and that would constitute more of a navigation. We're basically switching between an on and off almost. But in essence, a navigation is nothing more than moving to a specific state, right? So in a sense, I'll give us a pat on the back here and say that we did build a very lightweight navigation solution, even though we didn't. But in any case, what we've built here is very simple, very elegant, the ability to switch between two different features, right? We're building a foundation here. We're building the foundation on which we're able to switch between having a focus subject and not having a focus subject. If we don't have one, we probably want to fill one in. If we have one, we probably want to focus on that subject, so we're going to need a timer. Okay, so right now we know what we need to build. So let's get to building it. So far, we've built a solid foundation for us to build FocusTime on. You see, with this simple navigation air quote solution, we're able to ostensibly build what we need to build, and we know where to build it. And we have given ourselves little indications here of what we need in this spot. So, with that said, we're coming to our first crossroads, friends. We need to name something. And as everyone knows, naming things is the hardest part of software development. If I gave you a nickel for every time I hit a wall trying to name a feature or name a component or just name something in general, even a variable, it's always a tough job. But someone's got to do it, and that's us. So, over here, this is the first part that we're going to build. We want to build an input for our subject. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a folder inside our features, and we're going to call it focus because it's going to be what we want to focus on. And now, be aware that whatever I choose to name something, it's okay if you decide to name it something else. And if you find a better name, let me know. Let me know in the Discord, join our community, and let's have a conversation about it, because naming things is a hard thing. It's always nice to collaborate with people on naming. Now, inside of Focus, what we want to do is we want to create a focus.js, and this is going to be the component that's going to hold what we're going to focus on. And I always like to copy paste an existing component just to make things easier on myself. I clean it up a little bit. I remove some of the things I don't need, some of the bulk that's there. I call it focus. I'm not going to export default because I don't like that. You just do some minor cleanup, and we're going through this cleanup very quickly, but I'll show you what I did right now. The first thing we did is we cleaned up our state. We don't need state right here, right now at least. We may get back to it, but we've just cleaned up the component to have like a baseline template type of thing. We removed the export default here, and this is very important. I am an avid fan of not exporting default. First of all, because it created issues previously in React with specific naming of components and React being able to process the component. Second of all, I do agree with one file only exporting one thing to an extent. Honestly, it really depends on the patterns that you choose to do. But what this does for us, export const focus. Let's say we did export default function focus 2. I just want to quickly show you the difference. When we do this, well, the interface of the import is going to look something like this. If we went back to app and we said, hey, I want to import focus in here. So, well, focus is now this. Focus from, and then we can say dot source features focus.js. Okay. So, we named it focus. But in the file, we named it focus 2 because the export default is, or we could have called it default, function default, or we could have given it no name at all. It really doesn't matter. But because we exported default, it's now up to the import, the place where it's imported, to decide what name it's going to be. There's no enforcing here. But if I did this export const, what you're going to see is export default, just to quickly summarize, is saying this file only exports one thing, and this is the one thing you can import from this file. And we're forcing it in this way. But with export const, we're saying, hey, this is a named export. This is an export that's known by the file. And this file can export potentially multiple things, but for this case in point, we can have always the pattern that we only export const one thing. Now, that being said, the nice part about this is, if I did this, the destructuring, I now know that focus is in there. You see how it like autofilled like magic? That beauty of a named export, that we know what our interface is, that we know what is inside our file. I find it amazing. It's one of the things that I rave about. Now, not to knock on anyone that likes exporting default, and we have to keep this export default, right? This export default has to stay as is because it's the entry point of our application. Sometimes it's necessary. But personally, my preference is towards named exports for our own components, our own features, and anything in between. I like it so much more because I know what to expect. I know what I can have in every single file. And autofill, all these tools work better with it. It's nice. And you have consistency across files. There's no like someone naming this focus in one file, focus component in another file. There's consistency in the naming convention because you're importing focus. Not to say that you can't rename it. You can also rename this import by doing something like this. Focus as focus component. And then you can rename the named import. But at least you know what it was supposed to be, right? You know that focus was renamed to focus component at the top level and that it was meant to be actually this focus. So named imports, I find the interface, I find the clarity and the consistency of named exports just so much better. And, I've been talking about it quite a bit, but at the end of the day, what you need to know, and this is a preference you need to make up for yourself, is how you export things and keep it consistent. Consistency is key. Whatever you decide to do, just keep it consistent. You don't need to follow this specific style. Now, with all of that out of the way, we've talked a bit much about exports, but we need to start building our focus input. So the first thing we want to do is we want to say, hey, let's add a text field here. What would you like to focus on? Okay. And so with that, we now know, hey, okay, this is what we want to focus on. Like, we're asking a question, right? What would you like to focus on? But we also have to do something else. We have to put focus in the right spot so that it renders. And so it's asking us, what would you like to focus on? Amazing. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the padding around here because we're going to have focus determine how it's going to center things and what kind of color it's going to do and all this stuff. Let's go back to app. And I want to give our app a nice background color. And the background color we want to give it is kind of like a bluish tone. We want to give it like a nice distinct look. So we're going to say background color is, and then we're going to say pound 252250, which is like a, it's a nice blue. You can make it whatever color you want though. It doesn't have to be blue. But at the end of the day, we just want to make everything look nice. We want our app to look slick. Everyone likes a slick looking app, don't they? Okay. So the next thing we need to do, now that we have this, is we need to create a text input. Okay. So how are we going to add a text input? Well, let's look at that in the next video. All right. So now we want to add a text input. And to add a text input, I kind of want to use this library. It's a nice library. We want to add something called React Native Paper. And we want to add version 3.6.0. So this is what we're going to add to our dependency list in our package.json file. And once we add it in our package.json file, what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to go back to our focus feature, import text input from React Native Paper. And then once we do that, well, now we just need to put it on the screen, right? So let's do that. Text input. And once we do that, well, now we have a text input. Now, everything doesn't look so nice right now, right? Our text is black on a blue background. Our text input is right next to it. What are we going to do about this? Everything is ruined. Not really. We just got to do some layout magic, don't we? So the first thing we want to do is we want to remove this padding because we kind of want to do everything individually. So let's add a title. So let's style our title first. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to add a title container. We're going to add a view around it that's going to kind of like lay out the title in a certain way. And what we're going to give the title container is flex 0.5 to take up half the height of the screen. We're going to say, hey, give it a padding of 16 just because padding 16 sounds good. We're going to say justify the content to the center. So center the text. Okay. And now that we have all of that, what we can do is we can say view and we can say view. All right. And what we got to do now is we got to say style equals styles dot, you got it, title container. And let's prettier it up a little bit. Okay. So now that we got that out of the way, actually, we want our text input to be inside of this title container because that would look a bit nicer. It's taking up half the height of the screen, right? We'll work on that a bit later, but let's make our title look pretty first. So the first thing we want to do is we want to say, hey, make our title white. That's going to look nicer. It's going to look way better. And let's add some font weight to it, add some good old fashioned like bolding. That sounds good. And then once we do that, let's say that the font size is something like 40. That sounds like a good plan, but we still need to give it to the title, right? So styles.title. So let's do that. And now, boom. Okay, so 40 seems a bit large. So let's do like 28. All right, that sounds good. Maybe we want to get it on one line. Let's do 24. Okay, so that got it on one line. But also pay attention because this may vary between phones, screen sizes, all of that jazz. There's dynamic styling involved. There's high definition screens, low definition screens. The styling that you apply should, in theory, look close enough as you go along, but sometimes you may have to apply dynamic styling based on the platform. And for that, you could use something like React Native Platform, and then you could do something like platform.os equals Android, and you could do some kind of ternary, and you do 16 padding on Android, but 50 on iOS, and all of that jazz. Add the comma here, and you can see if I add 500 here now, it's going to do 500 on iOS. And you could do platform-specific styling like a hacky way like that. There's better ways of doing it, of course, and we'll get into those as we build our master project. But for now, we're trying to build FocusTime in a way that shows us the ropes and shows us raw React Native. So the thing that we need to do here, first of all, is we need to make sure that our text input has a nice positioning. So let's do style equal padding top, and let's say our padding top is 20, and let's prettier that up, and now it's, you know, nice and moved away from it. But there's one problem here. We don't want to do inline styles. So let's say that this is styles dot input container. And let's go ahead here and say input container. And let's do padding 20, padding top, and let's say 20. And boom, bada bing, bada boom. We're there. Now we have an input. And in this input, we can fill in stuff, right? We can fill in what we want to focus on. We could say, hey, I want to focus on gardening. Okay, but we don't have a way to submit it yet. We don't have a way to save it yet. We don't have a lot of different things. You know, we just have this text input, but it's not linked to anything. And so now our next challenge is actually storing whatever's input into the text input and passing it on to the parent app.js so that it can know what its focus subject is supposed to be, because that's what we're inputting in here. So in the next video, we'll look into that.